Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Sheila Colclasure, Global Chief Data Ethics Officer and Public Policy Executive for Acxiom and LiveRamp, an Acxiom company. Sheila previously was the America's Privacy and Public Policy Officer at Acxiom and has worked for the U.S. Senate and managed congressional affairs for the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. At Acxiom, Sheila directs the Enterprise Data Governance, Protection, and Privacy Program, and she specializes in data protection, privacy, safeguard, and telemarketing rules. Welcome here, Sheila.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, thank you. So tell our listeners a little bit about what Acxiom is and what it does. They may not be familiar with it.
Well, Acxiom is a mature technology company, and we work in the field of data technology. We collect data, we transform data, we activate data, we process data.
So where does privacy and security and all of that fit with the amount of data today? Because it's kind of massive.
It is more than massive, Chuck. If you think about data, and this is the way I like to think about it, this is the way we think about it at Acxiom and LiveRamp, data, at least the data that we work with for our clients and in our market space, is an abstraction of a human. And that's very important because data about people, how you collect it, how you use it for beneficial purpose is really, really important. And that's the way we think about it. So it's part data and the ethics around using data for good purpose. And it's also, as we accelerate into a time of advanced analytics in the digital era, those matter as well. The advanced analytics, the machine learning, and the AI matter as well.
Where does this stand today? You deal with a lot of companies. I know. Do companies, have they historically gotten this?
You know, some have. I think it's on a continuum. Some industry verticals have been more progressive. They really understand that data is fuel and that when you use data to drive an experience, you can create a better experience. You can create more brand affinity. You can create better outcomes. And it's on a continuum. I think all companies, to some degree, understand data. That's the way little companies grow large, and large companies get better. But I don't think everybody understands the data governance, the operational imperative that we really manage data in the design layer.
So how do companies start? I presume there's a difference between, say, financial services company and consumer product goods companies?
Well, yes, there are. And the financial services vertical, they are some of the more progressive companies. In other words, they're highly regulated. First of all, the data that they use, that they collect and use, is highly regulated, and they're accustomed to working in a very sensitive area. Data about our financial well-being or our financial status is very sensitive to us as humans, and it's correspondingly highly regulated. So financial service companies typically are well ahead. Now, in other verticals, the one you suggest, the consumer packaged goods, they use data, and they've always used data to measure the flow of their products and things about their products and the distribution of their products and the consumption of their product. What I see happening now, at least with the companies that we serve, is they're beginning to really connect the dots between creation of product, distribution of product, consumption of product, experience with product, and the people, the human that use their product. So they too are undergoing an evolution from product-centric data to people-centric data. And they're getting up to speed, and they're getting smarter about all this data governance space.
How does location play into this in your grand scheme? Because now people can be tracked pretty much physically everywhere.
Geolocation, or precise geo, and of course geolocation is on a continuum. Some can be very precise, and that's very sensitive, or can be, and some can be general, like a geographical area, like a city. I want to show you the weather that's going on in your city right now, less sensitive. However, you're right. First of all, because we are all mobile and we all have mobile devices, we pretty much are generating this precise geolocation all the time. And many different apps on our devices, and including the device itself, are collecting the precise geo. How that data is collected, if we are aware it's being collected, how it's being used either to serve us or to serve the brand that's collecting, is one of the friction points that the regulators and the consumer watchdogs care a great deal about. And what's incumbent upon brands that need that data to serve the expectations of the individual consumer is a great deal of sensitivity of, are they collecting the data and using the data in ways that are transparent to the consumer and beneficial to the consumer? Are they detecting and preventing potential harm? And are they protecting the data? The last thing is, are they giving some control to the individual where if I'm a consumer and I don't want to participate, I can choose to opt out?
Does the regulation of this, does it come by people like you helping, or is it the consumer giving pushback and the consumer just saying, I'm just not going to deal with this brand anymore?
Well, certainly consumers can say they're not going to deal with the brand anymore, but the bigger obligation is for brands to be ethical stewards of data. It's this term that we use at Acxiom and LiveRamp called the ethical use of data. That's why we've really evolved our program into global data ethics, because doing the right thing with data in every circumstance is the goal. But you have to have an operational methodology to accomplish that in the design layer, in the engineering stack. And that takes some sophistication and some nuance. Not all brands are there, and certainly consumers are not there. What consumers do know is when they're mistreated or there's a data incident or a brand's been predatory, they will react. The regulators care. We have to be sensitive to that. And we just need to be trusted stewards of data. We need to use the data for the benefit, for good outcomes, and we need to have methodologies that detect and prevent harms. And there's a whole flavor of next generation harms that all users of data, as we become data driven, must be very, very sensitive to.
But you live in the world of data, so this is like your backyard. Does this ethical use of data compete with the marketing use of data?
I think it informs the marketing use of data. And you're right. This is my backyard. This is my bread and butter. And this is one of the things I'm very proud of, is that the brands that I serve can trust my companies to get it right because we operate this way. And I think it's a big differentiator for how we think about the data that we activate and the solutions and services and products that we deliver.
So when you're dealing with a company, are you saying basically this is how we will do it, period? Or are you saying, how about we do it this way because you know it's the right way to do it?
I think it's a combination of both. We always start with a use case. What is the client trying to solve for? Remember, we meaning Acxiom LiveRamp, we work across many verticals. Some of them are highly regulated health verticals, and that's a very different thing. Financial services very sensitive, telco very sensitive. Some just retail marketing less sensitive. So we always start with what the client wants to accomplish. So the exact use case, then we look at the data flow diagram, how we're going to activate data, what data is coming into the solution, what is the targeted outcome, have we detected and prevented anything like hidden bias, discrimination, potential social embarrassment, or reputational damage. So we have an entire methodology that we design with where we bring the interrogatories down into the design layer, and we partner with the client. We collaborate to design their data-driven solution so that they can depend on the solution and the outcome of the data use is good.
So in the market in general, do you see some bad things happening?
I do, actually. I do see sometimes when maybe the data collection is clandestine. Maybe the consumer's not aware of it, or maybe the potential data use is beyond the scope of the promise on the data. And I think we all need to be very sensitive to what I said at the outset, that this data that we're talking about is an abstraction of a human. And we all need to be very human-centered in our design, and we need to look at the data activations through the lens of the consumer, of the human. Would they agree that this is a fair and appropriate use of data? Are they getting the benefit in addition to the brand getting the benefit and maybe the shareholders getting the benefit.
But what about a company that doesn't think like that? I mean, aside from the Axioms of the world, some company is they're collecting data and they're using it to target ads in a different medium, for example, and the consumers have no idea. It doesn't necessarily harm them. It's just not ethical.
Well, this is why we have regulators at the state and federal level in the U.S., and certainly we have the big elephant on the table, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, that is meant to really address that and create some mandates around data governance and the ethical use of data.
So do you think the GDPR results will basically flow back into the U.S. and other markets?
I think the GDPR is catalyzing the world. I think it's the world becomes digital. We are accelerating into the digital era, and the fuel of digital is data. GDPR is a response to that reality. And many other countries are paying close attention to those constructs in Europe.
So does anybody ever push back on this?
Oh, sure. Sure. We're struggling with in Europe at the moment is, of course, GDPR was enacted in April of 2016, and the companies that operate there that deal with European Union personal data have had 21 months or so to get ready. And I think the statistic I heard is that about 50% are not going to be ready by the enforcement date of May 25th, 2018. So I think we all must pay close attention to that and to the extraterritorial scope of GDPR and the catalyzing effect, the resonance it's going to have around the world.
Aren't there some big fines if people aren't ready?
Oh, my goodness, yes. I think that the Europeans have signaled that they are quite serious about next generation data governance and accountability, as well as record keeping. That's the other big thing I think people forget to mention about GDPR is all of your compliance has to be demonstrable and inspectable. And yes, the fines, they put some real teeth in GDPR. Fines can be up to 4% of global annual turnover or 20 million euros, whichever is greater. Now, it remains to be seen.
Those are big numbers.
Those are really big numbers. It remains to be seen how quickly actions will be brought, but all the data protection authorities I've spoken to have signaled their intent to absolutely use the full authority of the law.
For data, do you see privacy and security as the same thing or different?
Oh, they're different. I mean, you can't have privacy without security because if you have data, you should be a good steward and protect it from unauthorized or inadvertent access, of course. But it's its own parallel field. When you think about privacy, which requires security, it is about the use of the data and the choices that you give individuals, as well as the transparency around the data collection, use, and sharing.
But when you have some which research has shown, you'll have some consumers who say, look, I'll give you more data on me if you give me better value.
Yep, we call that the data value exchange. And I think today almost every individual is aware that when you operate in the digital, data is created, it's collected, and you derive some value. It's when the value doesn't line up or the consumer gets a surprise or, and I know we've all heard this term, gets creeped out, things have gone a bit too far. We all have to be very sensitive to that. And the pragmatists, which are most of us, we get the data value exchange, the pragmatists operate in that space. But there's another, and this was a famous body of work that was started by Dr. Alan Weston and has been continued since his passing. That the consumers break down into basically three sectors: the unconcerned, the pragmatist, and the fundamentalist. About 30%, 28 to 30% is fundamentalist, and those people are very, very sensitive. And with that much of the population in that category, we have to design our data governance, our transparency and choice programs around their sensibilities.
So, in terms of the consumer awareness, where does that go over time? Because consumers can't possibly be aware of how much data could be captured on them.
No, I think that is in an evolutionary state. The piece that I think we're all very heads down on, those of us that work in the field, and trying to figure out a way forward, a workable, practical, fair way forward, is in the space of advanced analytics as we accelerate into machine learning and artificial intelligence. Because with the massive data that is generated in the digital era, to make the data useful and to detect and prevent harms, you're going to have technology to help. What is the governance around that data intensive advanced analytic technology? I think we're working on those solutions right now in collaboration with regulators and researchers and academics. I don't know that that's a decided area yet.
Interesting about governance. What do you see as more difficult or tougher, security or policy around security?
Oh, policy, I'm not going to say it's easy, but policy is, keep everything secure, be reasonable. I don't think anything can ever be perfect, but practicing security with the amount of bad actors, that hackers for hire, um, implementing effective security is a challenge every day. It is, I've heard it called, and I think this is true, it's an arms race between the good guys that are trying to innovate responses and methods to keep their perimeters secure and their internal systems highly governed, with ingress and egress controls and logging, etc., and the bad actors that are attacking uh, all of us that are stewards of data. So I think implementing effective, ongoing, maintained security, it just takes one slight hiccup and you've got an incident.
So you're suggesting that policy is basically you can determine a policy, but you can't necessarily plug every single hole technically.
Yep.
So where in marketing, in a big organization, where in marketing does the issue of ethics around data reside?
Well, I think it's a vertically integrated function, right? You have to believe it as an enterprise that the data that is the very fuel of business, you are going to use in an ethical manner. You need to define what that means. And then you have to have a data governance, an operational data governance methodology to infuse that or integrate that into your enterprise. It does two things. It controls risk for the enterprise, and it also builds trust because it enables you, it brings the criteria along with the set of interrogatories so you can operationalize in the design layer, because the computer code is the conduct. You can function there, and then you can control risk, meaning you're fairly certain of the outcome, the beneficial use of the data, the detection and prevention of harm as you're designing the data-driven solution.
What about data from IoT devices? People are buying literally by the millions devices they're putting into their homes and they're connecting, and all of a sudden everything is running through the network.
Well, you have to have security, right? So the data is not accessed and could be potentially misused or accessed by an unauthorized entity and potentially misused. You have to have security, but you also have to have a plan for how the data will and won't be used. You have to have transparency for the individual the data relates to, so you don't end up with an incident or a surprise that creates an unintended consequence or harm. And then you need to give the individual that's plugging in all these IoT devices into their home some choices, some easy to use, meaningful choices. And as we do more and more IoT, and we work off of a small screen, we've got to design for the human and design differently. We've got to figure out how to solve this and make it easy on the small screen. It's what I call you have to have technology for transparency and accountability that moves faster than the technology of innovation.
So,
I don't think we're there yet, but that's what we need.
But the companies making these devices, I mean, they're just popping them off at CES. I mean, I couldn't even count how many new little devices there were from companies I'd never heard of.
Yep. I know, and this is part of, I think this is part of the innovation environment especially in the United States, where we innovate very, very fast. We may see some market correction if there are some incidents where the data use wasn't beneficial to the consumer, where it was actually harmful. We'll see some regulatory intervention. We may even see some class actions. And we've got to get the balance right. We don't want to disrupt innovation. There's amazing things coming out in IoT that's going to improve human life, and we're all pretty excited about that. But on balance, that's why this idea of ethics, of data ethics, is so, so important, because we always have to keep the human at the center, make sure that we understand our projects fully at the design layer, detect for harms like hidden bias or discrimination, as we discussed, and make sure it's fair. And the fairness needs to be judged from the lens of the individual in balance with our societies and our commercial enterprise.
So from the consumer standpoint, the choices they typically get are either opt-in or not. Is it, you're talking about more than that?
Well, I think that there's some opt-out. In European parlance, they call it consent. There's many different flavors. There's, gradations. In the U.S., we've long had this construct of opt-out for everything but sensitive data. And in that methodology, the benefit of the innovation accrues to the individual until and if they don't want to participate. The inverse is true with opt-in, where you don't get critical mass and you can't deliver the benefit until you actually connect with the person, explain the benefit, and they actively opt in. I think that there's a better way even than simple opt-in and opt-out. I think if companies are measured or evaluated on their ethical use of data, that there's a methodology that they're measured on, they can deliver good outcomes, and they can be held accountable. The thing that I worry about with the opt-in, opt-out choices is it shifts the accountability for the data use to the individual. If you can get them to opt in or opt out, then you can do whatever you want. And really, I think that enterprise commercial users of data should be accountable for the good, fair, and ethical uses of data. I think the regulators like that thinking. I don't know that all of our policy, legal, and regulatory constructs are lined up around that yet, but it's an ongoing conversation as we, again, accelerate into digital and the massive amounts of data that are being generated and consumed, as well as the advanced analytics, including machine learning and artificial intelligence, all these different agents that we will have to deploy to make use of this data and to inform the human experience with these IoT devices.
And some of this, lastly, is some of this lip service by companies where there'll be a mobile app opt-in and there's all the screen, and nobody reads that stuff, as you know, or most people don't for sure. And they just say, yes, you can use my location or no, whatever. So the company has technically taken care of their ethics and legal part, but in reality, the consumer doesn't get it.
Yep, we certainly have a departure there, and it's well known that most consumers don't read privacy policies. They expect the brand to be accountable and put the data to good use and good benefit. That's why I say that instead of just relying on the opt-in, opt-out piece where the accountability is on the individual, I think enterprise needs to be accountable. There's got to be a better way forward so we can innovate faster and there's more assurance and beneficial outcomes, and we preempt the data incidents and the potential harms.
So
you're right.
One last question. Long term, do you think that consumers ultimately this will evolve enough in the market that consumers will say, I trust that company, I don't trust that company with my data?
You've just said my favorite word and what I know to be true, that trust is the foundation of all human relationships. It informs my relationship with my best friend, with my spouse, and with the brands that I choose. Business moves at the speed of trust. If you don't trust, things go very slowly. If you trust, things go fast. And I do think that's true. I do think that individuals will choose to align themselves with brands they trust. And that's why it's very important for all of us as we become data-driven to operate with this ethical use of data construct in addition to getting the consent or the opt-in or opt-out. We all must be accountable for the data.
Thank you, Sheila Colclasure, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.